My name is Roger Lippman. I am a volunteer here at the People's Resource Center, and I work on computers. I work on refurbishing the computers over there. These are computers that we give out to our clients when they attend our computer classes, and I also work on repairs. Today's subject is speeding up your computer. Now, when a computer comes in for repair here at People's Resource Center, we fill out one of these. It's a repair order. Let's look at typical repair order. It says, computer runs slow. Please check for viruses. Here's another. Run slow. Suspect virus. And a third. Think it has a virus. Working very slow. Now you'll notice there's an obvious pattern here. Really several patterns. One pattern is that Windows computers tend to slow up over time, and people then complain that they're running too slow. The other thing is that most people think that their computer is slow because it has a virus. And it turns out that that's not always true. There are a number of things that cause a computer to run slow, and a virus is only one of them. So what we're going to do today is kind of go through the list of things that cause a computer to run slow and look at what the remedies are for each of them. And I'm going to divide this into hardware and software. The primary emphasis of this talk is on software, but if you're not running on the right hardware, there's little chance that you're going to get the kind of performance that you want. So let's look at hardware first. What do we recommend? We recommend, for running Windows 7 or later releases, Windows 8 or 10, these are the three releases that Microsoft is presently supporting, a multi-core processor. We also recommend 2 gigabytes of memory, or also known as RAM, as a minimum. Another issue that affects performance is your hard drive. Here's what your hard drive looks like if you haven't seen one. They come in various sizes, not physical sizes. They all look about like this, but in terms of how much content you can put on them. And they also have some variation in terms of performance. All of these record your data on highly polished platters magnetically. And these magnetic platters rotate. Think of a CD rotating or a DVD. And they rotate very fast, some at 7,200 times a minute, some at 5,400 times a minute. Now it stands to reason that something that's rotating faster is going to be able to retrieve your data faster, and that's certainly true. But I wouldn't get too concerned about the speed that your hard drive rotates. For general purpose computing, a 5,400 RPM hard drive works just fine. I have a laptop at home. It's 5 to 6 years old. Originally came with Windows 7. Now it's running Windows 10. It's got a 5,400 RPM hard drive, and it works just great. The performance is fine. So for your day-to-day computing, be it word processing, surfing the net, reading email, a 5,400 RPM drive will suit you just fine. So don't get too concerned about the specs on the drive. What is significant is whether that hard drive is working properly. A faulty hard drive can have a huge effect on performance. And hard drives fail in different ways. A hard drive can simply quit, in which case your PC isn't going to work at all, or it can start getting errors. A hard drive that gets read errors periodically is problematic. You get a read error, there's enough intelligence in the thing that it'll do a retry, and maybe it'll work the next time. Get enough retries going, and you can imagine that your performance is going to start dropping off radically. And this is something you probably need a technician to work on. If you've got a faulty hard drive, it's not something that you're likely to change on your own. But here's something that you can deal with. The hard drive is too full. Many people fill up their hard drives and don't realize it, and Windows is very fussy about that. If a hard drive approaches full, the performance of the computer just falls apart. I had one just last Friday, had a small hard drive in it. It was only an 80 gig hard drive, and that thing was essentially totally full. And one of the complaints from that particular computer owner was, indeed, the performance is very bad. In this particular case, we replaced it by a larger hard drive and cloned their data onto that, the whole thing, their whole image, the operating system, their applications, their data onto that larger drive, and then the performance was great. So this is important. A full hard drive, bad thing. Now I'm going to put this one up there, but we're not going to spend any time on Wi-Fi problems. Wi-Fi is wireless. A lot of computers use wireless, usually to get to the internet. Mostly laptops, but a desktop computer can have a wireless card as well. Most desktop computers are hooked to the internet with an Ethernet cable, so they're not using Wi-Fi. So just thinking about the Wi-Fi situation, somebody comes in with a computer and says, the computer seems to work well, except my internet performance is terrible. We can take that computer and put it in our lab and hook it to our Wi-Fi network. And if it works well, we know the problem has nothing to do with the computer. It has to do with their Wi-Fi network at home. And that is not within the bounds of this particular talk. Optimizing a Wi-Fi network is probably a talk unto itself. What we're talking about here is ways to speed up the computer, so we'll just put that one aside. Okay, we know what the hardware requirements are. Multi-core processor, 2 gigabytes of RAM. How do you know what you got? The low-tech approach is to read labels. Many computers have labels on them, and I've got some examples here. Here are 3 labels that you might find on a computer. The first one says Core 2 Duo. That is the duo means it's a dual core processor. So you know right away that's what you've got. The one in the middle says a Celeron processor, dual core inside. Same thing. It says it's dual core, so you know that it's adequate. Third one says a Core i3. Well, that may not be so obvious, but Intel's latest group of processors use the terms i3, i5, and i7, and they are all multi-core processors. So anytime you see an i3, i5, i7, that's good. Sometimes the labels indicate what operating system the computer was built for. If the computer was built for Windows 7, great. You know it's capable of running Windows 7. This one says it was built for Vista. Vista is the operating system that came out just before Windows 7. And it was a resource hog, so if this thing runs Vista, it's going to run 7 or 8 or possibly 10 very well. Here's something that doesn't make the grade. A label that says a Pentium 4 processor built for Windows XP. If you see that, you don't want to be putting Windows 7 or later on that computer. And the problem is that people do. They'll take an older computer like this and upgrade it to 7, and then say, oh, it doesn't run well. And you bet it doesn't. And there's nothing we're going to be able to do about that. It's simply the wrong hardware. And it's wrong for 2 reasons. It's wrong because this processor doesn't really have the horsepower to run Windows 7 well. And it's wrong because these older processors use an older style memory, and there's just no way I can get up to the 2 gigs that I need to get the performance that I want. So you see that on a computer, there's not much you can do about running a modern operating system. It's just insufficient and it's just too old. Okay, how else might you know what you're running on? Let the computer tell you. If you have a running computer, it's got to be working, then you can do this. This display is known as the system display. You can get to it several ways. If you have an icon on your desktop that says computer in Windows 7, or it says this PC in Windows 8 or 10, you can right-click with your mouse on that icon. You get a menu, properties at the bottom, left-click on properties, you get this. The other way to get to this is from the control panel. Just click on the item called system. And you've got several pieces of information here. This says AMD Athlon 2 X2 processor. Now what does that mean? First of all, AMD is a second manufacturer of processors after Intel. You'll usually see an Intel processor or an AMD processor on your computer. I happen to know that the X2 is a dual-core processor. But if you have any question about what something like this means, just call us. We'll be happy to figure it out for you. The other thing this says is, I've got 4 gigs of RAM, 4 gigs of memory. So this machine is perfectly capable of doing what we want to do and getting good performance. The other thing I talked about is a disk drive that's too full. How do you know about that? This is a different display. Again, you get it from those same icons, the computer icon on 7 or the This PC icon in a Windows 8 or 10. But in this case, you left-click and you get this display. And here you have the computer's main drive, usually labeled C. And this is where everything lives, your operating system, your applications, and all the files that you've made or acquired over time, like pictures or music or Word files, whatever. And this indicator shows you how full the drive is. This one would be about 2/3 full, and the white portion is the part that's empty. Not a problem. This should run fine. But if you see a display like this, where the indicator is turned red, that's because that hard drive is almost full. Now, there is a little bit of space on this one. It's probably not quite at the point where performance is going to degrade radically, but if that gets any fuller, which it's sure to do over time, that performance is going to drop. And so a full hard drive, again, very bad thing, and this is how you see this. It's interesting that when we repair computers, we sometimes forget to look at this first, and it's really the first thing we should look at. Because if this case is true, all bets are off. We have to do something about that full hard drive. Well, you can do something about a full hard drive as well. And the first thing you do is just check it the way I described on the last slide. And now if it's too full, some things to consider. One, deleting unnecessary files, and I say large files. If you just delete a few Word files or Excel files or PowerPoint files, that is not going to make a lot of difference because they're pretty small. If, on the other hand, you've been downloading feature-length movies and you delete a few of those, that can make a huge difference in the amount of space available on the drive. So you want to get rid of large and unnecessary files. That's one way to free up space. And it's something anyone can do. Or we might move files to some other storage. I might set up an external storage device on my computer. This is a hard drive that plugs into USB, a USB port. This is a terabyte hard drive for about $60. I have a drive here that's probably a lot bigger than the one inside my computer. Okay, so I plug this into USB. Now, if I'm on a desktop that's always in the same place, you know, I can plug this in and leave it there permanently. And what that's going to give me is a second lettered hard drive on my machine. My initial drive would be C. Maybe my CD drive would be D. Maybe this comes up with an E or some other letter. So I have a second hard drive where I can put stuff. Just be careful how you move stuff to a second hard drive. If you just drag it, say from the C drive to the E drive, by default, that's a copy. Copying a file isn't going to free up any space on your C drive at all. But it's a good place to start. You will, once you've checked that you have a good copy on that E drive, you can then delete the original on the C drive and free up the space. And by the way, you might just use a little flash drive if you're talking about smaller quantities. The problem with these is they're comparatively slow, and they don't store as much as a full external hard drive does, but they are, on the other hand, they're very convenient. Let's say if it's in a laptop, you could leave this there permanently, and you wouldn't want to have this hanging on your laptop permanently. The other thing you might do is move files off to cloud storage. We have had several talks here in our Tech Talk series about various cloud services. iDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, and I understand Amazon has one. And If you use those services, you can move files off to the cloud, off of your computer. And the second advantage of that is that files once put on the cloud are available from any machine where you have internet access. Of course, you could get a larger hard drive inside your computer, but again, that's something a technician would probably have to do. It requires opening the box, replacing the drive, and somehow moving all your stuff onto a larger drive. So it's probably not something you would do yourself. If you're doing stuff yourself, delete files, move them to an external drive, move them to a cloud. Finally, there are a couple of cleanup utilities that help free up space on your hard drive. Something called Disk Cleanup comes with Windows, and a utility called CCleaner is a free third-party utility. Now I'm going to mention a number of third-party utilities today, and then I have a slide toward the end which describes where to get all these. Okay, so we have a reference. We can get all these utilities. These are all good, safe utilities that we're going to talk about today. These two utilities not only free up some space on your hard drive, they actually do a much more important job. They get rid of unnecessary temporary files, and we're about to talk about that in the software section. So freeing up space is kind of a secondary thing that they do, but it does help do that. Okay. That ends our discussion of hardware, and now we get into the meat of this thing, software issues. I'm going to list software issues that cause your computer to be slow, and then we're going to talk about how to deal with each of them. First one is startup items. These are programs that start up when your computer is booted. And you don't want a lot of these, and we'll talk about that. The second is accumulated temporary files. Windows makes a lot of temporary files as it operates and kind of leaves them around, and they slow up your system. A third is something called rogue security programs. They have names that make them sound like they're great, and they're anything but. These are programs that do nothing but hog your resources and sometimes try to convince you to buy something. There are thousands of these, and we'll talk about not only what they are, but how you get them, and if you've got them, how to get rid of them, and hopefully how to avoid getting them. Registry errors. A registry is a part of the Windows operating system that often accumulates errors over time, and those errors do cause performance problems. Various types of malware. Now, malware means any bad software. It's a general term. Someone has coined the term junkware. There's spyware. This is something that spies on you, like a keylogger. A keylogger is a program that watches the keys you type and could therefore steal a password that you typed or a credit card number that you typed. You certainly don't like those. Adware, trying to sell you something. But all of these things slow up your machine. And then there are the classical viruses. We'll talk about the definition of a virus later. Finally, Windows performance does degrade over time due to constant updates that Microsoft provides. Now, why does Microsoft provide updates? These updates are to plug security holes, to keep ahead of the people who are writing this bad software, and to try to keep it out of your machine. They do updates regularly, and they are necessary, and you want them. A side effect is that these updates over the life of an operating system do slow it up some, but that's something we just have to live with. Now, by agreement with industry, Microsoft has grouped the updates so that they tend to come out once a month, so you kind of know when they're going to happen. They happen on the second Tuesday of the month, which just happens to be today. And they happen at about noon Chicago time, which happens to be right about now. And that was a coincidence. We didn't plan it that way. They can issue an update anytime, especially if there's an emergency. Some new threat comes up and they have to deal with it immediately. But generally they package them and issue them once a month on the second Tuesday, which we call Patch Tuesday. Remember I said at the beginning that everybody thinks they have a virus. But notice that even if I combine the malware with the viruses, numbers 5 and 6 here, there are all kinds of other reasons why your computer may be slow, namely 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's not always a virus. Let's look at these one by one. Startup items. As I said, these are programs that start when the computer is booted. They occupy the computer's memory. As such, they can interfere with the things you want to be doing. The memory in a computer is the part of the computer that you use when you're using an application. If I launch Microsoft Word, it pulls it off the disk drive into memory. As long as there's ample space in the memory, things will run well. But just like with the hard disk, if the memory fills up, the performance will get very bad. So if I have too many items starting up when I start up the computer, and I don't need them to be started up, they just fill up my memory and slow me up. So we want to know how to deal with that. To do so, we run a utility in Windows 7 called msconfig. And in Windows 8 or 10, we go to something called the Task Manager. And we want to delete, or essentially turn off, all items that are not necessary at startup time. Very few programs need to start when you start your computer. Generally, I mean, if you started nothing but Windows, it would run. There's a few things you may want to start up, such as some virus protection, which you want running all the time. But you don't want a ton of stuff starting up that you don't need. Here's msconfig. Here's the utility I talked about in Windows 7. To find it, you click the start icon and you type msconfig into the search box and you get this. What you see here is a list of programs, and everything with a check on it is starting up when the computer starts up. And you're not even seeing the whole list. There's a scroll bar here, so you're not even seeing everything that was starting up on this machine. Well, that's totally unnecessary. How do they get on this list? Software developers, when they develop a product, and you install it, always throw themselves into this list. And so the list gets longer over time. You can turn these off just by unchecking the boxes. Do you need Skype when the computer is starting up? Not if you're not planning to use it all the time. If you want Skype, just click on the Skype icon when you need it. The same goes for many of these. Adobe Acrobat, you certainly don't use that a lot. That reads a certain kind of file called a PDF file. If you're not dealing with those, you don't need Adobe Acrobat running all the time. Again, if you ever need it, just click on the PDF file and it'll launch then. So there's all kinds of stuff in here that you simply don't need at startup, and you can turn off almost all of it. And once you do, you click apply and you're done. It's as simple as can be. And then of course restart your machine so you don't have all this stuff running. Without all the startup items, your memory is not filled up, your machine is going to run better. In Windows 8 or 10, the equivalent is the Task Manager. It's very similar. To get to the Task Manager, you right mouse click on the taskbar at the bottom and select Task Manager, and you get this. If perchance you get a tiny little window, there'll be something down here that says More Details. And you click on that and you get this version. And I didn't mention this for msconfig, but in both cases you click the Startup tab, because it's startup items we're talking about here. Okay? In this case, instead of checkboxes, you have this thing that says disabled or enabled. To disable a program, you just select it, click on it, and click the disable box. Or alternately, right-click on it, and you get a menu and disable it. Same deal. Disable most everything. You don't need Acrobat Reader. Maybe you're using Dropbox as cloud storage, and you do want to start that every time the computer started. So in this particular case, we left it enabled. But you don't need a lot of things to start up when that computer starts up. And you'd be amazed when you get a long list like this, what that can do to your performance. By turning these things off, that alone can fix performance problems for you. So that's the first item. That was the first thing. That was startup items. The next one is accumulated temporary files. Windows creates temporary files during normal operation. And according to this, it says it doesn't always do a good job of cleaning them up. It is my impression that it never does a good job of cleaning them up. And obviously, as they accumulate over time, they slow up your computer, and they do so in several ways. Slow operation can be general or specific. There are things called temporary system files, and these slow up your computer as a whole. And there are things called temporary internet files, and those slow up your browsing specifically. So we want to deal with all of those. What can we do? We can run some cleanup programs that I mentioned briefly earlier. One is called Disk Cleanup, and that comes with Windows, and I'll show that to you. The next one is called CCleaner. It's a free third-party utility. Now, why do we need two of these? There is some overlap between them, but no program covers everything, and if you run them both, you'll find that the second one finds stuff that the first one didn't. Always. Another related, but not identical to what I was just talking about thing is to initialize your web browsers, or also called restoring them to factory conditions. There are a lot of add-ons associated with web browsers and toolbars associated with web browsers that can slow them up. So initializing your web browsers is also a good thing to do to speed up your browsing. Now, unfortunately, the three major web browsers, Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, you all have a slightly different mechanism for doing this. I have some supplemental slides at the end that show how to initialize each of these web browsers. Okay, here's the first of the two utilities. It's called Disk Cleanup. In Windows 7, you can find this program in the Start menu, filed under Accessories, and within that, under System Tools, you will find Disk Cleanup. When you first launch Disk Cleanup, you don't see this immediately. You see something that's just calculating the amount of space that it can clean up. And when it's calculated, then it comes up with this. You may see this additional button that says Clean Up System Files. That's a different category of system files that accumulate with Windows updates over the months. And that can free up a substantial amount of disk space in the multi-gigabytes. It seems that they've included this automatically in some versions, so you won't see the button. But if you see the button, click it. It'll go through a second calculation, and the amount of disk space that it can free up will be larger than without that. And then finally you click OK, and it does the cleanup. Takes a few minutes, and once it's done, you have cleared up temporary files and freed up some disk space as well. It's well worth doing, and this alone can have a significant effect on your performance. Sometimes temporary files are the main cause that a computer is slow. We had one the other day that we ran all the things we're going to be talking about on, and we hadn't done this kind of thing, and this is what made all the difference on that particular machine. And then there's CCleaner, the other utility that I suggest. You'll have to find this one on the internet. Again, I have it in the summary, and it needs to be installed. And you simply can click Analyze, in which case it figures out what it can clean up, and then you click Run Cleaner, and it'll do the cleanup. You can actually skip the Analyze phase. You can go directly to Run Cleaner and have it do the whole thing. I always do it that way, and there's really no harm in that. So, those two utilities clean up temporary files. Any questions? No?
What happens with all your files? Then they're just gone?
This is temporary files. This is not your file. This is stuff that Windows creates to do its job. If the operating system was more clever, it would clean these up for you. But it doesn't seem to be. These are not your files. Let's look at the next one, Rogue Security and Performance Programs. There are thousands of relatively useless programs which have names that make them sound useful. Super Optimizer, how could that possibly be bad? Well, if you like that one, how about Super Optimizer Pro? It's a different program, equally bad. Somebody compiled a list on the internet of rogue security programs. This multi-page, multi-column printout is a list of rogue security programs that are out there. As you could see, there is a ton of these things. And this is just the rogue security programs. There are also rogue programs like this one, that are rogue performance improvement programs. And they do anything but. They often get installed unintentionally in what we call the sneaky install. The way you get these is you are purposely installing something or updating something. And hidden in all of this, there's some checkboxes on the screen that say, do you also want this, that, and the other thing? And those are the bad things. And you want to make sure those get unchecked. There is a little utility that I recommend called Unchecky, which tries to uncheck these things to make sure that you don't pick up these rogue programs when you're doing what you want to be doing. Unfortunately, it's not 100% effective, but it's well worth having, and I'll show you an example of where it did the job. You often can recognize that you have these rogue programs by pop-ups they cause. Something pops up on the screen and it starts scanning your computer, and you know, where'd that come from? And they can dominate your screen and really take over the operation of your PC. So what do? First of all, if we're vigilant and we're watching what's going on when we're installing things or upgrading things, we'll try to make sure that if these checkboxes come up to try to throw these extra programs at you, that you uncheck them. But it's a bit tricky because they hide them pretty well sometimes. They'll hide them in license agreements, in small print, and unless you're extra vigilant, it is possible that you're going to get some of these. And unfortunately, if you do, they must be manually uninstalled one by one. And we'll talk about that. I was working on a computer about a month ago, and I booted it up. This was a repair we were doing. I booted it up, and I get this. Super Optimizer. I never even got to my desktop. All I got was this. And this was not a static display, which you see here in the screenshot. This was a dynamic thing that's scanning the computer, supposedly, and finding all kinds of stuff. And I want to make this thing go away so I can get on with getting rid of it. This was particularly nasty. Hit the close box, it ignored me. Hit the cancel, it ignored me. It was pretty hard to make this thing go away. It was done through the task manager. Then I could go about the business of uninstalling this thing. This computer had only one of these rogue programs, Super Optimizer, on it. Nothing else. And yet, this one program rendered the computer essentially useless. Now, sometimes people get much more than one of these, especially if they're not watchful of what they're doing when they're installing programs or upgrading programs. We have a technician upstairs that was working on a computer, and he wrote down on the repair order every rogue program he found and got rid of in working on the computer, and the repair order looked like this. There were 47 of them that I counted. That's a mess. As I say, the person who owned this computer obviously wasn't very watchful. I have whited out their name to protect the guilty. But this is not a good thing, obviously. So you can get a lot of these things, you can get one of these things, and they're all bad. Here's an example of how we get a rogue program. Java is a useful program, which is something that websites use to do animation. And like Windows, Java has updates that come out periodically, and you want those updates. What has happened over time is that as Microsoft has made its operating system more and more bulletproof, the virus writers, the malware writers, have discovered that these other programs like Java and Flash were a good place to sneak in to cause problems on your computer, to put viruses on your machine. So now Java and Flash, two programs that also issue periodic updates, and you want those updates. So here we are updating Java, as we should be doing, and along comes these checkboxes. Install Amazon Assistant. Make Amazon Smart Search my homepage. Make Amazon Smart Smart Search my default search. I don't want to do all that. I want to update Java. Apparently the Java people have some financial agreement with the Amazon people. Well, I don't care. Now this is fairly innocent, but it shows you how the sneaky install works. I'm doing one thing, an upgrade, and I'm getting offers for other stuff. That's how I get this stuff. So I want to uncheck these before I say next. And that's the way I prevent myself from getting these kinds of rogue programs. Here's another example which involved Java a little while back. I was updating Java and it said recommended, set Yahoo as to my home page, or the case that I do want, do not update my browser settings. This would have come out wrong. It came out right because that little program I talked about called unchecky caught it and flipped that for me. I wish it worked every time, but it's very useful because it works a lot of the time. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be vigilant, but it does help. If I get rogue programs on my machine, how do I get rid of them? I go to the control panel and I click on Programs and Features. Programs and Features gives me a list, theoretically at least, of everything that's installed on my computer. I scan this list and I look for things that look suspicious. Well, I kind of know what looks suspicious, but how do you know something is suspicious? If you have any doubt about a program being suspicious, Google it. If the first 5 items that come up in Google start up with something like how to get rid of, you know it's something you don't want. But in any event, let's say I want to get rid of this one, and I right-click on it, and I click on Uninstall. That's how I uninstall something. Be patient. It may not look like anything's happening immediately. Another problem with this is that occasionally, when I say uninstall something, another little window pops up that says, do I really want to do this? And the window might be hidden behind this one, so I don't see it. And nothing will happen until I react to that. So move this window out of the way and make sure nothing has popped up behind it that I have to agree to do this uninstall. And eventually, if things go well, this item will disappear out of the list and the uninstall would have been successful. Now, most people don't realize it, but Windows doesn't actually uninstall anything. The only reason that programs get uninstalled is each individual program comes with an uninstaller. And the uninstall is only as good as the uninstaller that comes with that program. And if you consider that these things are bad programs, sometimes the uninstaller doesn't work at all. Sometimes you just get an error. Well, what do? Well, there is a nice utility called the Revo Uninstaller, highly recommended by computer experts, by the way, which you can get. And what Revo does is first give you a display of this list. It does it in icon form, but you can see all the programs on your machine. Anything in this list should appear in Revo. And I click on one saying I want to uninstall it. So the first thing it tries to do is run the built-in uninstaller that comes with the program. Fine. If I went to Revo, it probably won't work, but it'll do that, and then it'll go on. Say, okay, what's the next step? What it will do is scan the entire computer looking for any files that are associated with this program. It'll scan 2 things. It'll scan the registry of the computer. It'll scan the rest of the hard disk, and it will provide 2 lists to me of all the files, all the entries in the registry and all the files associated with that program. I can select all and delete the entire lot. This is a more thorough uninstall than you'll ever get than you typically get with built-in installers anyway. And it will work when the built-in uninstaller does not. So that's the Revo Uninstaller. And unfortunately, as I say, if you're unlucky and you've got a lot of these rogue programs, this is going to take you some time. Registry Errors is the next one on my list. The registry is a database that stores low-level settings for Microsoft Windows. And certain applications choose to use the registry also to store their low-level settings. The reality is that over time the registry gets errors. Just happens. Mistakes happen somehow in the software and the registry gets errors. So what do I do about that? And these errors, by the way, sometimes are benign, but sometimes cause slow operation of your computer. So, what do? Unfortunately, there are many rogue programs on this list which claim to be registry cleaners. Well, you don't want those, so you've got to believe me in terms of which one is good. And I will suggest one free, excellent registry cleaner. It is called the Uninstalling Registry Cleaner. You get this program, and you simply run it. And it looks like this. There are two things you can click on. The first one says scan the registry for issues, and it's going to come up with, a few minutes later, a lot of things it finds wrong with the registry. Now, most of these are benign, and it's always going to find a lot of them. In this case, it found 177, and that's not even a big number for this program. And then you say, okay, repair these registry issues, and it goes about the business of fixing all these problems. Very simple. Anybody can do this. Just be sure to let it finish before you close this program down. And you have solved the problem of errors in your registry. Simple as that. Okay, various kinds of malware. It goes by all kinds of names. Junkware, spyware, adware, worms. These are not programs that can be uninstalled like the rogue programs I've talked about previously. So this is another class of problems. And we need another set of utilities to deal with malware. So we run these, and once again, there are lots of rogue programs that claim that fix your malware. Let me just read a few names of programs on this rogue list that claim to get rid of spyware. We have SpyAway, SpyX, SpyBouncer, SpyCrush, SpyDawn, SpyEraser, SpyGuider, SpyHeal, SpyLock, SpyMarshal, SpyRid, SpySheriff, and on and on and on, and none of these are any good. So you have to know which programs are good, and there are some good ones lost in this chaos, and the important thing is they are free. So again, you're going to have to believe that we know which programs are good, and here are some suggestions. We run these three simple utilities on just about every machine that comes in for repair. First one is called JRT, the junkware removal tool. The next one is ART, the adware removal tool. The next one is the ADW Cleaner. It's a product out of France. That stands for Adware Cleaner. These are free utilities that do an excellent job and they kind of concentrate on things that slow up browsers. And slow internet performance seems to be a common theme. So we want to run all three of these. They are free. They don't do anything unless we use them. So, but they are powerful. And then we get to the big boys. A program called Malwarebytes. Now that's one that's got a name that scares people away. People think it's malware. I wish they'd picked a better name, but that's the name of the company and the name of the program, and it's an excellent program. It comes in a free version. It comes in a paid version. We put the free version on every machine that goes out of here, by the way. The free version doesn't do anything unless you run it. You have to bring that program up. You have to update it to get the latest definitions, as they call it, representing the latest malware, and then you need to do a scan. This thing finds all kinds of things, anywhere from malware to true viruses. Very, very important. There are a couple other programs like that, Spybot Search and Destroy and Super Anti-Spyware. We don't usually have to resort to running these. If we do these three and that one, you're usually in pretty good shape. All three of these come in free versions and paid versions. The typical difference is that the paid version can be set to scan automatically and update itself automatically, whereas the free version, you have to do it yourself. So that is the malware problem. And then we get to the true viruses. Well, what makes a virus a virus? Here's the formal definition. A computer virus is a program or a piece of code that is loaded onto your computer without your knowledge and runs against your wishes. Well, that's not anything surprising. But here's the crux of the matter. A virus works like a virus in the medical field. It can replicate itself. That's what makes a virus technically a virus. A simple virus that does nothing but make a copy of itself over and over again is relatively easy to write, and is dangerous. Even such a simple virus that does nothing but just make copies of itself fills up your memory and eventually brings your system to a halt. And that's just the beginning of it, because a virus can also perform any malicious activity that the writer intended. Have any of you heard of ransom viruses? You have, okay. A ransom virus. It's about the worst thing around. A ransom virus gets on your machine and it encrypts all your files. Now, if you know how encryption works, it's something that you can do to prevent someone else from being able to read your files, but you need a software key to decrypt that file. In this case, the virus encrypts all of your user files, your music, your pictures, your Word files, so you can't use any of them, and the bad guy over in some foreign country has the key to decrypt these files. So you've lost everything unless you pay them the ransom they demand. And that's usually done by something like PayPal that can't be traced, which is just what they want. And if you don't pay by a certain time, they'll increase the ransom. It's a real problem. These kinds of viruses usually attack businesses. Last February, there was a big news story about a ransom virus that hit a hospital. And ransom viruses are typically network aware. That means they get on one computer in a business's network and they spread to all the other computers in the network. So this hospital lost the use of all its records. Can you imagine that? And they paid thousands of dollars to the perpetrators of this virus to get the use of their files back. Now, we don't usually see this on individual computers, but we've seen it on client computers about 3 times, so it can happen. These are things you don't want to get.
It happened to a friend of mine.
Did it?
With a phone call, and then they got into the computer and encrypted everything.
Usually it's clicking on something.
And emptying out bank accounts.
Nasty. What can we do? The biggest thing we can do is prevention. We want to make sure that your computer has all those latest security updates, which are a nuisance sometimes, but they are so very necessary to try to prevent this kind of thing from happening. We want to make sure that other utilities such as Flash Player or Java are up to date. And then you've been warned over and over, I'm sure, don't click on attachments on emails from unknown sources. Someone else here that gave a talk recently talked about another case that's common, where people do a common search. They search for, let's say, movie stars. Lots of people are interested in Hollywood, or TV stars, and you get a list. And somewhere toward the top of that list is something that if you click on, you're going to get a virus. Now, why is that so? Because the virus writers have figured out how to get their virus high up in the result list when a search gets made. So sometimes you're just going to get tripped up. So what we want to do is run a good antivirus program. Here are some suggestions. For Windows 7, there's something called Microsoft Security Essentials. That won't work on Windows 8 or 10, but there is an equivalent that's built right into the system for that in 8 and 10. Here's some other commercial, and there are free versions of these, commercial antivirus programs. Bitdefender, I particularly like that one because it works in the background and you kind of don't know that it's there. AVG, Avast, a couple that aren't on the list, Avira, Kaspersky. So there are a lot of good antivirus programs out there. One thing that you want to be sure of is that you have only one of these, because they get in each other's way. And when they do that, they can affect your performance significantly. So you want one good antivirus. You want to make sure that it's scanning regularly, but they also work in the background looking for things all the time. So these are very important. So, if you've picked up a virus by clicking on the wrong thing, you would hope that your antivirus program kicks in and kills it. And finally, Windows updates. I have mentioned that Windows does these updates regularly in order to prevent your computer from getting infected by malware or viruses. They're unavoidable. You should have these updates. You should make sure that your computer is up to date to help protect it. Every properly functioning computer should get updates regularly, and the fact is they do impact performance over the life of an operating system. You can't help it. Windows XP is no longer relevant here, but when XP first came out, it was incredibly nimble. It was very fast. It ran with very little memory. Over the years, as you had updates and updates and updates, and they grouped some together as Service Pack 1, 2, and 3, XP became rather clunky and slow. That's life. If you have the right hardware, if you've taken these other measures to deal with your software, the slowness that's caused by updates over the years is something that we just have to live with. No choice. Finally, sometimes we do everything that we've talked about here today in this talk, and we still fail to get to the desired performance. Why might that be? Well, Windows can become corrupted. Something can be damaged in Windows. Maybe a virus damaged your operating system in some way. I can get rid of the virus, but I can't necessarily get rid of the damage. So, what can I do? I can do as the Chicago Bears do, punt. And that means start over. It means load a fresh copy of the Windows operating system. And I have heard some computer experts recommend doing this every year or two. But it's not a trivial proposition. Because if I load the operating system over again, what's going to happen to my text files and music and pictures and so forth? And what's going to happen to the applications that I installed after installing the operating system, such as Microsoft Office, excuse me. Obviously, I lose those. So I have to take measures to deal with this. So it's probably something you don't want to try to do yourself. But if there is no other choice, this is something that we do. We start with a fresh copy. The nice thing about a fresh copy of Windows is it's unencumbered by any of these issues that we've talked about today. This is the summary of where to find the various utilities. These are the websites where you can get them. You'll see this 9night.com mentioned a number of times here. Let me just say something about the 9night.com site. Very nice website. It's got a whole list of programs associated with it. And you check off the ones you want. Let's say you want AVG, or you want Avast, or you want whatever. I mean, you can even get Google Drive and things like that on here. They're not all security programs. And then you click this Get Installer. You're going to get the installers for all of these programs that you've clicked on. And the 9night installers are very nice because they will always go out, when you run one of these installers, it'll go out to the internet and get the latest version. So if I've got the 9night installer for Malwarebytes and I execute it, it'll get the latest version of Malwarebytes. So this site covers a lot of it. There are some of the utilities that I mentioned previously which are not on 9night, and you just have to go out to their specific sites to find them. And that's it.